In April 1987, three promising young actors mysteriously vanished during the intermission of a theatrical performance at Edinburgh's prestigious Grand Royal Theatre. Despite a thorough investigation, no trace was ever found, and the case was abandoned. 17 years later, a shocking discovery reignites the mystery. Their costumes, untouched and hidden inside a forgotten safe. Driven by a desperate promise and haunted by unanswered questions, one woman embarks on a gripping journey to uncover dark secrets and confront terrifying truths hidden beneath the stage. What really happened to those missing actors? The answer is more disturbing than anyone could imagine. April 18, 1987. Edinburgh, Scotland. Behind the heavy crimson curtains of the Grand Royal Theatre, the air was thick with anticipation. Backstage bustled with nervous whispers, muffled laughter, and hurried footsteps. James Porter stood quietly in front of a small mirror, adjusting his ornate blue and gold prince costume. Tall, poised, and mature beyond his 18 years, James gently tapped his knuckles 3 times against the wooden makeup table, a ritual inherited from his father, believed to ward off bad luck before stepping onto the stage. Nearby, Ollie Brown stood silently. At 17, he appeared younger, thinner, almost fragile. His slender fingers gently polished the handle of his magician's wand, his gaze focused and distant behind round glasses. Quiet, yet filled with unspoken dreams, Ollie always seemed to exist just slightly apart from the world around him. Tonight, however, his eyes sparkled with a rare excitement. Then there was Emily Clark. Bright curls framed her glowing, youthful face, her colorful jester costume glittering under the dressing room lights. Emily's contagious laughter filled the space, her eyes alight with dreams of applause and spotlights. She nervously giggled, betraying the hidden anxiety beneath her carefree exterior. "Relax, Em," James reassured gently, noticing her jittery laughter. "We've rehearsed this 1,000 times." "I know," Emily smiled anxiously, her voice wavering slightly. "But tonight just feels different." The room fell briefly silent, the weight of those words lingering heavily. The stage manager's voice broke the tension. 5 minutes to curtain. The 3 young actors exchanged a final glance, brimming with youthful optimism. Their dreams felt within reach. Hollywood seemed only a breath away from the Grand Royal's wooden stage. The lights dimmed, and a hushed awe fell over the packed audience. The orchestra's gentle melody drifted upwards, filling every corner. Soft notes intertwined gracefully with whispers from patrons dressed elegantly for the evening. Velvet-covered seats creaked quietly as the audience settled, their eyes eager for the spectacle promised tonight. The curtain slowly rose, revealing a breathtaking royal court scene. Gold-trimmed banners draped elegantly, chandeliers shimmered softly, and polished wood gleamed warmly beneath vibrant costumes. James, Ollie, and Emily flowed effortlessly through each act, their chemistry enchanting the audience. Laughter erupted. In waves, applause echoed enthusiastically. For these young actors, the performance felt magical, timeless. Intermission arrived swiftly, curtains descending gently as cheers resonated powerfully through the theater. Backstage again, the trio hurried toward their dressing rooms to change costumes for the final act. Oliver quickly vanished behind a curtain, Emily followed, and James paused briefly, smiling warmly at their success. Minutes passed. The stage manager checked his watch impatiently. The audience's murmurs intensified, eager for the play to continue. Yet the actors did not return. Anxiety grew backstage. Actors exchanged worried looks, confusion settling into genuine concern. Where are they? Someone whispered anxiously. The stage manager hurried toward the dressing rooms, knocking urgently. Silence. Entering, he found the rooms empty, costumes left untouched, personal belongings scattered. A chill crawled up his spine. "They're gone," he announced, panic rising in his voice. Actors scattered, calling out names desperately, their voices becoming frantic echoes against backstage walls. The theater buzzed with confusion and growing fear. Patrons began murmuring louder, sensing something amiss. Within an hour, the theater was swarmed with police officers. Flashlights danced over wooden floors and velvet curtains. Detective Andrew Sinclair, seasoned yet visibly puzzled, traced the steps leading from the dressing rooms to beneath the stage, ending abruptly beneath a concealed trapdoor. "Look at this," Sinclair pointed, highlighting faint footprints in the dusty passageway under the stage. "They walked here and just vanished." The officers exchanged perplexed glances, silently confirming an eerie impossibility. Questions arose rapidly, yet answers remained elusive. Families arrived, hopeful and then terrified. Tears filled eyes, anguished voices filled hallways. Sarah Porter, only 12, stood quietly amidst the chaos, her small figure trembling slightly as she watched her mother sobbing desperately. Her eyes searched everywhere for James, her beloved brother, protector, hero. She clutched tightly a small silver bracelet engraved with his initials, her fingers trembling, heart heavy with dread. Days became weeks, and weeks became months. The investigation gradually cooled. Newspapers wrote less, police asked fewer questions, and eventually the case was shelved. Friends moved forward, families mourned silently. Yet Sarah, stubborn and unwavering, could not accept that her brother would simply vanish without reason, without trace. One rainy evening, weeks after the disappearance, Sarah stood alone in James's untouched room. Posters from Hollywood films decorated walls, scripts lay scattered carelessly. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered defiantly into the silence, "I promise, James, no matter how long it takes, I will find you." Years passed slowly, each bringing fewer whispers and fading memories. Yet Sarah never broke her promise. She grew older, quiet, and determined, keeping James's bracelet as a constant reminder. 17 years had passed, yet Sarah Porter had never moved beyond the painful night her brother vanished. Now 29, she lived a quiet, solitary life in a modest apartment in Edinburgh, filled with memories rather than friends. Every wall bore James's image, smiling, acting, full of dreams that were cruelly snatched away. Sarah often spent evenings alone, meticulously sorting through old photographs and faded newspaper clippings. The police had given up, friends had moved on, even their mother had accepted the painful silence. But Sarah had never surrendered. James's letter mentioning Professor Richard Byrne reignited something fierce within her, a hunger for truth that had never died, merely slept. Byrne had passed away 2 years prior, leaving only Margaret, his enigmatic wife, still residing in their large Georgian house at the edge of town. Sarah remembered Margaret only vaguely from childhood. An older woman, polite yet cold, always shadowed by quiet tension. Determined, Sarah resolved to seek her out. It was a chilly morning when Sarah approached the Byrne residence for the first time in nearly 2 decades. The sprawling house stood solemn and imposing beneath a gloomy Scottish sky. Ivy crawled up the gray stone walls, windows stared out darkly, and the air felt heavy with secrets. Sarah's pulse quickened with anxiety as she knocked firmly on the massive wooden door. Margaret answered slowly, eyes narrowed in suspicion. Her gray hair was perfectly arranged, face composed but stern, lips pressed tight. A forced smile flickered momentarily. "Yes?" Margaret's voice was smooth but carried a subtle edge. "Mrs. Byrne, I don't know if you remember me, but I'm Sarah Porter, James's sister," Sarah began politely, her voice gentle yet firm. Margaret's expression shifted instantly, guarded, eyes wary. "Of course, Sarah. How can I help you?" "James left me a letter," Sarah explained softly, trying to mask the anxiety shaking her voice. "He mentioned costumes once Professor Byrne kept stored here. They might help me understand what happened all those years ago." Margaret's eyes hardened. She shook her head firmly, her voice clipped. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but there's nothing here that can help you. Richard never mentioned costumes or any letters. You're wasting your time." Her sudden defensiveness, too sharp and quick, sparked an instant suspicion. Sarah carefully masked her emotions, nodded politely, and stepped away, her heart racing in the days that followed. Margaret's reaction haunted Sarah. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was hidden inside that old house. Driven by intuition and desperation, Sarah found herself quietly parked near the Byrne home night after night, watching silently from the shadows. The house seemed darker, lonelier at night, a silhouette against Edinburgh's misty darkness. Ancient oak trees swayed, branches creaking ominously, and rain often tapped gently on the roof and windows, creating an eerie rhythm. Shadows danced in the windows, always Margaret's silhouette pacing nervously, restless and vigilant. Sarah's determination deepened, driven by certainty that the truth was buried within those walls. A stormy night provided the perfect opportunity. Rain fell heavily, masking Sarah's quiet approach as she moved stealthily toward the Byrne house. Each step on the slick ground felt heavy, her heart pounding loudly. Approaching a partially opened window near the rear entrance, Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she lifted herself inside. Inside, the house felt cold, almost lifeless. Antique furniture loomed in the shadows, covered in dust. Portraits watched silently from walls, their eyes following her every move. Sarah's breath echoed softly, fear mingling with determination as she ascended cautiously toward the attic. The stairs creaked beneath her weight, each sound amplified by silence. Pausing frequently, she listened carefully for Margaret's movements. Her heartbeat filled her ears, adrenaline surging with every step upward. Reaching the attic, Sarah's hands were shaking. The door opened slowly, revealing a room crowded with forgotten memories. Boxes stacked haphazardly, furniture covered in sheets, and a large, dusty cabinet stood solemnly at the far end, hiding secrets. She moved forward, breathing shallowly. Senses heightened by anticipation and fear dotted the cabinet's base. Partially hidden behind stacked boxes stood an old metal safe. Rusted but formidable, its presence commanded attention. Sarah's throat tightened as she knelt, hands moving instinctively, fingers trembling. Guided by a blend of intuition and desperation, she tested combinations related to the theater, to Richard Byrne, and finally James's birthday dot. With a soft click, the safe surrendered its secrets. Inside lay 3 neatly folded costumes, preserved perfectly despite the passing years. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she gently lifted James's prince costume. The fabric felt cool, heavy, charged with memories. Beside it lay Ollie's magician cape and Emily's vibrant jester outfit, still vibrant, hauntingly untouched. Overwhelmed, Sarah sat quietly, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. The reality of this discovery was staggering. It was no longer just suspicion. This was proof something sinister had occurred. And Margaret Byrne knew far more than she had admitted. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked downstairs. Sarah froze, panic gripping her chest. Margaret was awake, alerted perhaps by instinct or some unseen alarm. Holding her breath, Sarah carefully returned the costumes, closing the safe gently. Footsteps sounded clearly now, slow, deliberate, ascending towards the attic. Sarah's pulse thundered in her ears. She had no time to hide properly, only to slip quickly behind stacks of boxes, heart hammering violently. Margaret's steps paused. Briefly at the attic door, the silence filled only by the rain pounding heavily outside Dot as the door opened slowly. Sarah pressed tightly against the cold wall, praying silently that Margaret wouldn't notice anything disturbed. Margaret entered the room cautiously, eyes scanning suspiciously. Her movements were slow, methodical. She hummed softly, an old, unsettling lullaby drifting through the attic silence. Sarah's blood turned cold at the haunting melody. She fought against the overwhelming urge to flee, every muscle tensed to remain still. Margaret lingered, seemingly sensing something was out of place, yet unsure exactly what. After what felt like eternity, Margaret sighed softly, turned slowly, and retreated downstairs. Leaving the attic door partially ajar behind her, Sarah waited several agonizing minutes before daring to move. Carefully, silently, she stepped out from behind her hiding spot, moving cautiously toward the attic door. Each step felt perilous, nerves frayed. As she reached the threshold, she froze again. Margaret's footsteps echoed softly on the stairs. Below, returning to the attic once more, Sarah stood rigidly still, breath trapped painfully in her chest, eyes wide with dread. She was trapped, vulnerable. Her mind raced frantically, searching for escape, for explanation, anything to survive this moment. Margaret's shadow began to ascend visibly, slowly, deliberately, her lullaby whispering softly again. Closer now, a chilling prelude to confrontation. Sarah pressed herself deeper into the shadowy corner of the attic as Margaret's footsteps slowly ascended. Her heart thundered violently in her chest, her breath shallow and nearly silent. Margaret hummed that eerie lullaby again, closer now, its haunting melody blending chillingly with the rain pounding on the old roof. The narrow attic staircase creaked with every deliberate step Margaret took. Sarah knew she had seconds to act, her pulse quickening in panic. Suddenly, downstairs, a phone rang sharply, slicing through the suffocating tension. Margaret paused, letting out an irritated sigh. Sarah heard her mutter under her breath before, retreating quickly back down the stairs. The lullaby faded, replaced by Margaret's distant voice answering the phone. Seizing the precious chance, Sarah bolted from her hiding place, slipping carefully yet quickly down the attic stairs and through the hallway. She exited through the same window she had entered, barely feeling the cold rain soaking her clothing as she sprinted away from the house. Clutched tightly under her arm were the precious costumes, proof she hoped would finally uncover the truth. Back home, Sarah laid the costumes gently onto her kitchen table. She stared at James's princely outfit, Ollie's magician's cloak, and Emily's vibrant jester costume, each perfectly preserved, untouched by time. Sarah's heart ached with sadness and anger. These were not mere costumes, they were the last tangible pieces of 3 lives unjustly interrupted. Determined, Sarah contacted the Edinburgh Police Department early the next morning. Officer Reed met her with polite skepticism, patiently listening. As she presented the costumes and recounted her suspicions about Margaret Byrne, the officer examined the evidence without enthusiasm, occasionally scribbling indifferent notes. These costumes were found locked away in the attic of Margaret Byrne's home. Sarah pressed anxiously, her voice tight with urgency. "You need to reopen the case." Reed sighed softly, his expression sympathetic yet unmoved. "Miss Porter, I understand your frustration, but we investigated thoroughly years ago. There simply isn't enough here for us to justify reopening the case." Sarah's voice trembled with frustration. "But these costumes, without new concrete evidence directly linking Mrs. Byrne or her late husband to the disappearance." "Our hands are tied," Reed interrupted gently. "I'm truly sorry." Angry tears stung Sarah's eyes as she stormed out of the police station. She knew that justice was now solely her responsibility. With renewed determination, she dove deeper into the past, researching Richard Burns' career and tracking down former students who might provide insight. Through weeks of tireless investigation, Sarah uncovered disturbing accounts. She met Emily Walker, now 34, whose eyes filled instantly with tears at the mention of Richard and Margaret Byrne. They called it discipline. Emily Walker whispered shakily over coffee. We endured long hours locked in practice. Rooms isolated, repeating lines until our voices failed. Margaret watched silently, almost obsessively. Richard enforced her commands without hesitation. It was as if she was pulling his strings. Sarah reached out gently, her voice soft yet resolute. Emily, did they ever physically harm you? Emily hesitated, haunted memories surfacing. Emotionally, mentally, we were broken down repeatedly. Margaret said pain would make us exceptional actors. Richard never intervened. It destroyed my self-esteem. I still struggle daily. Another former student, Tom Avery, revealed similar traumas. Now a successful playwright, Tom's voice quivered, recalling the cruel methods Margaret Byrne utilized. Margaret was obsessed with control, Tom explained bitterly. Richard followed blindly. Margaret believed complete submission was essential to our development as artists. Those who resisted were publicly humiliated or isolated until they surrendered. Sarah listened carefully, empathy deepening with each account, her resolve hardening. Margaret Byrne was not simply cold. She was dangerously manipulative. Each testimony strengthened Sarah's suspicion. Margaret was the true puppet master. Richard merely an accomplice, a man ensnared by his own insecurities, and Margaret's iron-willed days became a blur of late night research and anxious sleeplessness. Sarah began sensing a presence following her, unseen eyes always watching. Shadows seemed darker. Footsteps echoed suspiciously behind her at night. Fear mingled with determination, making every day feel like walking a knife edge. One foggy evening, as Sarah returned home, she sensed clearly someone following her. Pulse quickening, she glanced nervously over her shoulder, seeing nothing but shifting shadows. Unease tightened her chest, quickening her steps. Approaching the old stone Ponte de Leith bridge, heavy mist swallowed the surroundings. Streetlights, dim and blurred. Halfway across, bright headlights erupted from the fog. A dark vehicle roared directly toward her, engine screaming, accelerating purposefully. Sarah froze momentarily, terror gripping her limbs. At the last possible instant, instinct forced her aside. She lunged toward the stone railing, scraping painfully against the rough surface as the car narrowly missed, tires screeching violently past her, collapsing against the cold stone wall. Gasping and shaking, Sarah watched the dark car vanish rapidly into the mist. Heart pounding painfully, she realized with horror that someone had just deliberately attempted to silence her forever. Fear threatened to overwhelm her, but fury burned brighter. Shakily returning home, Sarah locked every door and window, paranoia sharpening her senses. Exhausted yet resolute, she knew retreat was impossible. Someone wanted her silenced, and that only meant she was dangerously close to the truth. Sleep was fitful and brief, nightmares merging seamlessly with reality. She rose early, determination renewed, driven by adrenaline and the desperate need for answers. The day passed in anxious research, paranoia lurking in every glance over her shoulder. That evening, returning home after another fruitless day chasing fading leads, Sarah noticed something alarming. Slipped beneath her apartment door was a plain white envelope, stark against the dark wooden floor. Her blood chilled instantly. Fingers trembling, she opened it carefully. A single slip of paper lay inside, typed letters sharp and threatening. Stop. while you still can." The brief, menacing message sent cold dread coursing through her veins. Her apartment suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. Someone had effortlessly breached her safe space, delivering a stark warning directly into her life. Panic surged momentarily before determination reclaimed her resolve. Sarah knew this was no empty threat. Someone powerful feared her proximity. To the truth. Margaret Byrne, her mask slipping, her desperation showing clearly. With shaking hands, Sarah folded the note carefully, placing it gently alongside James's letter and the costumes. Each piece, a fragment of an incomplete puzzle, begging to be solved. She would not surrender now. Fear would not silence her. Taking a deep breath, Sarah steadied her racing heart. Whoever sent that warning underestimated her resolve, the depth of her courage born from 17 years of grief and loss. They could threaten her, frighten her, even hurt her, but she would not stop. James deserved justice. All three of them deserved justice. As darkness deepened outside, Sarah stood quietly by her window, eyes fixed defiantly toward the shadowy city. Whoever wished her harm now had declared war, igniting within Sarah an unshakable resolve. She whispered fiercely into the silence, "You won't scare me away. I'm coming for you." The stark warning Sarah had received haunted every thought, but instead of scaring her away, it deepened her resolve. She knew now that someone feared her investigation enough to threaten her, which meant she was finally getting close to uncovering the truth. She was determined more than ever to finish what she'd started. Late in the evening, under the cover of darkness, Sarah returned to the Grand Royal Theatre. The place had been closed for renovations, left quiet and forgotten in recent months. Rain fell lightly, soaking the streets, turning the theater's exterior into a glistening shadow. Sarah approached carefully, carrying a small flashlight, heart pounding and senses heightened. She slipped quietly through a side door that she'd discovered unlocked during her earlier research. Inside, the familiar scent of dust and aged wood enveloped her, instantly transporting her back to that fateful night 17 years before. Her footsteps echoed softly as she moved down the darkened corridor, her flashlight beam slicing through the blackness. Stepping onto the stage felt surreal. She could almost hear the echoes of applause, laughter, and whispered lines from that tragic evening. The wooden floor creaked gently beneath her feet as she moved slowly toward the area near the trapdoor, where the police had found those mysterious footprints years ago. The silence pressed heavily on her chest, every shadow seeming to watch her movements closely. Kneeling, Sarah examined the trapdoor. Her hands trembled as she carefully lifted it, revealing the yawning darkness beneath. A wave of damp air rose immediately, carrying with it an earthy, musty scent. She shivered involuntarily, nerves tightening like a coiled spring as she aimed her flashlight downward. Ancient wooden stairs descended into the pitch-black void. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Sarah slowly descended into the hidden passage. Beneath the stage, the air became colder, heavier, the silence almost suffocating. The stairs creaked beneath her weight, echoing softly against the narrow walls. At the bottom, she found herself in a cramped tunnel lined with bricks and old timber beams. Cobwebs brushed against her face, making her skin crawl. Step by careful step, Sarah advanced through the darkness, flashlight trembling slightly. The oppressive narrowness of the tunnel heightened her anxiety, making her breathing shallow and quick. The air grew thicker with moisture, carrying a faint, acrid odor of mold and decay. Every few steps, she paused, listening carefully, half expecting to hear voices, footsteps, or even Margaret's chilling lullaby further ahead. Sarah's flashlight beam caught something unexpected: old wooden crates stacked against one wall. Approaching cautiously, she knelt and examined them, pulling away a dusty, tattered cloth. Beneath lay something disturbing: rope fragments, dusty theatrical masks, and chains, rusted but unmistakably strong. Sarah's pulse quickened, stomach tightening painfully with dread. This wasn't merely a passage, it was evidence of captivity, of a sinister plan carefully concealed beneath the staged heart racing. Sarah continued deeper. Moments later, her flashlight illuminated a small alcove hidden behind more crates. Carefully removing them, she uncovered a dusty wooden box. Her fingers shook slightly as she opened it, revealing a stack of old photographs. The images made her breath catch painfully. James, Ollie, and Emily stared back at her from those faded, grainy pictures. They were alive but young, their eyes wide and fearful, expressions strained. Sarah flipped quickly through the images. Each one showed the actors confined somewhere, perhaps beneath the burn home, their faces reflecting a disturbing mix of hope, exhaustion, and desperation. Tears blurred Sarah's vision. They had survived the initial disappearance, at least for a while. The chilling realization gripped her. Margaret Byrne had planned and executed everything meticulously. Richard had likely played his part, but Margaret's obsession with control was now horrifyingly clear. James and the others had been taken, hidden away, forced into submission by Margaret's twisted obsession with creating perfect actors. Shaken but resolute, Sarah gathered the photos carefully, knowing they were critical evidence. As she left the tunnel, her body shivered from adrenaline and relief when she finally climbed back onto the stage. Emerging felt like escaping a tomb. The fresh air a welcomed relief. The following days found Sarah determinedly seeking answers from people who had worked in the theater at the time of the disappearances. Initially reluctant to speak, former employees slowly opened up, cautiously revealing unsettling stories they'd kept hidden out of fear. A retired janitor, Mr. Gordon, spoke hesitantly, eyes darting nervously as he recounted hearing whispered arguments between Richard and Margaret backstage. Richard often sounded desperate, Gordon admitted. He'd plead with her, beg her to reconsider whatever they were doing. But Margaret... she always controlled everything. An elderly usher named Evelyn revealed something equally disturbing. Margaret had keys to every room, every hidden door, Evelyn said quietly, her voice wavering. She wandered freely, often late at night, humming softly. There was always something unsettling about her, like she was watching, planning something dreadful. But we were too frightened to say anything. Jobs were scarce, and Margaret had influence. Each revelation deepened Sarah's anger and sorrow. Margaret Byrne had crafted a web of fear, manipulating everyone around her, ensuring their silence through intimidation and control. Richard, once respected and beloved, had become just another victim trapped by his own insecurities and Margaret's ruthless dominance. Returning home each evening, Sarah felt constantly watched, paranoia gnawing at the edges of her thoughts. The anonymous warning note remained ever present in her mind, a reminder of the danger she faced. Yet nothing would deter her now. Late one night, as Sarah examined the photographs again, the awful truth struck her forcefully. Margaret had orchestrated everything, her obsession disguised behind Richard's reputation. The images were proof of Margaret's cruelty, her manipulations, and her ruthless methods. Sarah's heart clenched tightly, a mix of fury and grief overwhelming her. She realized with horror that Margaret had stolen not only their freedom, but also their dreams, their identities, and their hope. Each photograph felt like a silent cry for justice, a desperate plea from the past. Sarah's phone rang suddenly, startling her from deep thought. An unknown number appeared. Hesitating briefly, she answered cautiously. "Miss Porter." An unfamiliar male voice spoke quietly. "You've been asking dangerous questions. I can help you, but only if you listen closely." Sarah's pulse quickened. Who is this? "Someone who knows Margaret Byrne better than anyone," the voice replied tensely. "Meet me tomorrow evening, after dark, near the old ticket booth behind the theater. Come alone." The line went dead before Sarah could respond, leaving her shaken and deeply uneasy. Yet the possibility of learning more was irresistible. She had no choice but to trust this mysterious ally. Despite the evident risks, all night Sarah wrestled with her doubts, haunted by fears that this meeting could be a trap. But James's face, forever young and hopeful, kept returning to her thoughts, pushing aside hesitation. She owed him, and Emily, and Ollie the truth. She owed herself closure. By the next evening, determination had replaced fear. As Sarah stepped carefully through the shadows toward the abandoned ticket booth, her breath formed anxious clouds in the cool air. The theater loomed darkly nearby, silent and ominous, cloaked in secrecy. Suddenly, footsteps approached softly. A figure emerged slowly from the darkness, a familiar silhouette she hadn't seen clearly for years. It was Andrew Sinclair, the detective who had handled the initial investigation. He nodded gravely. "Sarah, there's something you need to know about Margaret Byrne, something we've overlooked all these years." Sarah held her breath, pulse hammering. Sinclair hesitated briefly, eyes shadowed by regret. "Richard wasn't controlling Margaret as we thought. She was controlling him. The entire operation, the disappearance of your brother and the others, it was all Margaret's doing. Richard was merely a pawn." The revelation struck Sarah heavily, confirming her deepest fears. Margaret Byrne wasn't just involved. She was the mastermind behind the whole tragedy. A new, chilling realization settled over her. Confronting Margaret would be dangerous, perhaps deadly. But Sarah knew she had no other choice. Sinclair touched her shoulder gently, eyes filled with urgency. "Be careful, Sarah. Margaret Byrne has no conscience, no mercy. She will protect her secrets at any cost." As he walked away, disappearing into the shadows, Sarah stood alone in the silent darkness, resolve solidifying like steel within her. She whispered softly, fiercely into the night, "I'm coming for you, Margaret. Your secrets won't stay hidden much longer." The conversation with Detective Sinclair left Sarah shaken yet resolute. The shocking revelation that Margaret Byrne was the puppet master behind the tragic disappearance of her brother and his friends ignited a fierce determination. She needed undeniable proof to confront Margaret and finally free those she had held captive for nearly 2 decades. Driven by an urgency she had never felt before, Sarah tracked down Arthur Hughes, an elderly former stagehand who had worked closely with Richard and Margaret. Arthur lived in a small, cluttered apartment in central Edinburgh, where memories crowded every available surface. When he saw Sarah standing in his doorway, sadness shadowed his eyes. "I expected you'd come eventually," he sighed softly, ushering her inside. The apartment smelled faintly of old books and strong tea. Sarah settled nervously into an armchair as Arthur paced anxiously, clearly tormented. "Arthur," Sarah began softly, voice heavy with emotion, "please tell me everything. Why didn't anyone speak up about Margaret before now?" Arthur's eyes misted, regret clear in his weathered face. "Fear, Sarah. Margaret controlled us all. Richard was talented but weak. She dominated him. Anyone who challenged her faced ruin. Careers ended, threats made. We were terrified." He lowered himself slowly into a chair, hands trembling. "I remember one night, shortly before your brother disappeared. I overheard Margaret shouting at Richard. She accused him of weakness, threatened to destroy him if he failed to follow her plans. I knew then she was dangerous, obsessed with molding young actors into her twisted vision of perfection, but I was too scared to act. Arthur's voice cracked, tears glistening in his eyes. I'm sorry, Sarah. I've carried this guilt all these years. We all did. Margaret convinced everyone your brother and his friends ran away, but I never believed it. We all knew Margaret was behind it. Sarah reached out gently, gripping his trembling hands, reassuring him despite her own heartache. It's not your fault. Arthur, Margaret controlled everyone. But now we have a chance to stop her. Across town, Margaret Byrne paced restlessly through her dark, quiet house. Her normally composed face twisted momentarily with a disturbing intensity, revealing the true depth of her obsession. She entered her private room, walls lined meticulously with old photos of performances, glowing reviews, and clippings about vanished actors. Her fingers traced obsessively over images of James, Emily, and Ollie, her perfect trio. Trapped forever in her personal theater, Margaret's cold eyes gleamed with a twisted pride, murmuring softly, almost ready, almost perfect, driven by desperation. Sarah returned to the Byrne house once more, this time armed with knowledge, determination, and evidence. Darkness cloaked the old Georgian home, shadows deepening beneath a crescent moon. Slipping silently inside through the now familiar entrance, Sarah carefully navigated the dark corridors toward the basement entrance she had uncovered from the theater. Tunnel map. Descending the narrow stairs into the hidden basement, Sarah's pulse quickened painfully. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of dampness and neglect. At the bottom, she hesitated briefly before stepping into a scene that stole her breath away. Before her stood small cells, meticulously designed like miniature theatrical stages, complete with dim lighting, backdrops, and props. The horrifying realization settled heavily upon her. Margaret had forced them to perform endlessly. Prisoners in her twisted vision. Sarah moved cautiously, heart pounding, stepping quietly along the corridor. Voices echoed faintly ahead, painfully familiar yet chillingly distorted by despair. She crept closer, hiding carefully behind stacked props. Her throat tightened painfully at what she saw. James, Ollie, and Emily, now adults but clearly broken, worn thin by years of imprisonment, stood under harsh lights, mechanically reciting lines. James's voice, once vibrant, sounded hollow and exhausted. Ollie's eyes, once keenly observant, stared vacantly forward, while Emily's laughter, previously joyful, had vanished completely. Again, Margaret's voice sliced through the air like a blade, sharp, cruel, emotionless. Her silhouette loomed ominously from the shadows. Until it's perfect, you will not rest. Sarah's heart shattered witnessing their suffering, tears stinging her eyes. Rage mingled powerfully with profound sadness, her mind racing for a plan. She silently took photos, determined to have undeniable proof of Margaret's crimes. Suddenly, Margaret stepped into the harsh light. Her expression was cold, eyes devoid of humanity. "You disappoint me, James," she hissed bitterly. "You were always my masterpiece. Now you're just as pathetic as Richard." James visibly flinched, his body trembling, eyes reflecting deep anguish. Sarah gripped tightly to her hiding spot, every muscle straining against the impulse to rush forward. Margaret circled her captive slowly, voice calm yet chillingly ruthless. "I have sacrificed everything for your perfection. Yet still, you resist. Still, you fail me." Sarah's breathing quickened. Fury surged within her, but caution forced restraint. She needed authorities. She needed absolute certainty that Margaret could not escape justice. Margaret's footsteps echoed sharply as she finally exited, slamming the door behind her. Silence enveloped the prisoners, broken only by quiet sobs from Emily. "We have to hold on," James whispered softly, voice strained but determined. "She won't control us forever." Sarah's heart swelled painfully. James had always been strong, a leader even now, enduring unimaginable torment. Gathering her courage, Sarah moved silently back towards the stairs. She needed to escape unseen and bring help immediately. But suddenly, Margaret returned, footsteps quicker, sensing something amiss. Sarah froze instantly, her blood turning to ice. "Who's there?" Margaret's voice snapped sharply, her footsteps accelerating. Sarah pressed herself deeper into the shadows, her heart nearly stopping. "You think you can hide from me?" Margaret sneered, approaching rapidly. "I see everything. I know you're here." Sarah's pulse thundered violently, panic clawing desperately inside her. Margaret moved methodically, footsteps dangerously close. Sarah held her breath tightly, praying silently for invisibility, for a miracle, for salvation. Then Margaret turned abruptly, eyes fixing sharply upon Sarah's hiding spot, lips curling into a cruel smile. "Sarah," Margaret said calmly, voice filled with menacing triumph. "You should have listened to the warning." Sarah's blood froze, every nerve screaming in terror and desperation. Margaret approached slowly, deliberately, eyes cold, dangerous, utterly devoid of mercy. "You wanted to find James?" Margaret whispered chillingly, now mere feet away. "Congratulations, you've found him. Welcome to my theater, Sarah." Margaret's cold hand reached toward her hiding spot, the chapter ending in a moment of absolute, breathless horror. Sarah's heart thundered wildly in her chest as Margaret's icy hand reached toward her hiding spot. Her breath was trapped painfully in her throat, every muscle tensed in desperate anticipation. Margaret's cold eyes glittered with malicious triumph. "Come out now, Sarah. Let's not play games," Margaret said coolly, voice soft yet terrifying. "You wanted answers, didn't you? Now you'll have them." Sarah stepped cautiously from the shadows, meeting Margaret's chilling gaze with defiant courage. Her voice shook slightly but remained firm. "Let them go, Margaret. This madness ends now." Margaret laughed bitterly, eyes narrowing dangerously. "Madness? No, Sarah. I offered them greatness. Richard was too weak to see the potential, too pathetic to follow through. He lacked vision. I had to make him see. I had to take control." "You destroyed lives," Sarah shot back fiercely, emotions flooding her voice. "You tortured them for nearly 2 decades. You stole everything from them, tortured." Margaret sneered disdainfully. "I gave them purpose, discipline. True art demands sacrifice. They were nothing until I shaped them." "You're delusional," Sarah snapped, stepping closer, rage and sorrow fueling her courage. "You manipulated Richard, terrified everyone around you. You're the weak one." Margaret obsessed, pathetic, and completely alone. Margaret's calm demeanor shattered instantly, replaced by violent fury. With an angry scream, she lunged at Sarah, her eyes wild with madness. Sarah stumbled backward, fighting desperately against Margaret's surprising strength. They grappled violently, knocking over props and furniture in chaotic disarray. "You have no idea what I've sacrificed," Margaret shouted hysterically, her voice raw with anger and desperation. "Richard was nothing without me. He never had the strength to create perfection." Sarah fought desperately, adrenaline surging through her veins. In a burst of strength, she managed to push Margaret backward, sending her crashing against the stage props. Margaret collapsed momentarily stunned, allowing Sarah precious seconds. Sarah rushed quickly to the cells, trembling fingers fumbling urgently with locks and chains. James, Emily, and Ollie stared at her blankly, initially unable to believe their eyes. Then recognition slowly dawned, tears filling their weary eyes. Sarah. James's voice was barely audible, cracked and exhausted but heartbreakingly familiar. Sarah felt tears spill uncontrollably down her face as she embraced her brother tightly, their sobs mingling painfully. "I'm here, James. You're safe now," Sarah whispered fiercely, reassuringly. She quickly freed Emily and Ollie, who clung to each other, weeping openly, overwhelmed by disbelief and relief. Behind them, Margaret struggled to rise, eyes blazing with hate and determination. She reached desperately toward a fallen piece of wood, gripping it tightly and lunging violently at Sarah once more. "Behind you!" Emily screamed sharply. Sarah spun around just in time, narrowly dodging Margaret's attack. With sheer instinct, she grabbed a metal prop beside her, swinging it forcefully. Margaret crumpled to the ground, temporarily neutralized, eyes rolling back momentarily. Gasping, Sarah turned urgently to James, Emily, and Ollie. "Quick, let's go. The police are coming. Hold on to me." Together, they stumbled from the basement, emerging breathlessly into the crisp night air. Flashing police lights illuminated their faces moments later, officers swiftly securing the scene and apprehending Margaret. As she was handcuffed and led away, Margaret began softly singing her chilling lullaby once more, eyes vacant, utterly disconnected from reality. James, Emily, and Ollie collapsed gratefully into waiting ambulances, wrapped warmly, receiving gentle medical care. Sarah remained beside James, refusing to leave his side, holding his hand tightly, a bond that had never truly broken. Families reunite with overwhelming joy tempered by grief over the lost years, and James leans on Sarah as they begin a long but hopeful path to recovery. Weeks later, Sarah visits Richard Burns' grave, feeling sorrow for the man who, though weak and manipulated, was also a victim of Margaret's obsession. Supported by a caring community, James, Emily, and Ollie gradually regain strength and resilience while Sarah heals alongside them. On a serene spring day at a countryside retreat, the four share quiet laughter and renewed optimism. James thanks Sarah for keeping her promise, and she affirms she never stopped believing. With Margaret's darkness lifted, they look toward bright new futures, bound together by the love and determination that carried them through their ordeal.